The United States won its independence, but the first attempt at a government, the Articles of Confederation, was too weak to hold the country together. Imagine a football team where the coach has no power and every player can ignore the calls. That's what it was like. States acted like separate countries, printing their own money and ignoring the federal government. By 1787, it was clear a new, stronger system was needed. The Constitution wasn't just a rewrite, it was the birth of a whole new way to run a country. So, in the summer of 1787, 55 delegates from the states met secretly in Philadelphia. They weren't just fixing the old government, they were starting from scratch. These men, known as the Framers, included brilliant minds like James Madison, who came prepared with detailed ideas. George Washington was there too, lending his massive prestige to the proceedings. The heat in that room, both from the weather and the arguments, was intense. But what came out of it was the framework for the longest-lasting written constitution in history. One of the biggest arguments was about representation. How many votes should each state get in the national legislature? Large states, like Virginia, said it should be based on population. Small states, like New Jersey, cried foul, demanding equal votes. This deadlock nearly sank the entire convention. The solution was the Great Compromise, which created the system we still use. 2 houses. The Senate gives equal representation, 2 senators per state, and the House of Representatives bases it on the state's population. It satisfied both sides and saved the convention. Another incredibly difficult and dark compromise was forced by the issue of slavery. Southern states wanted to count their enslaved population to gain more representatives in Congress, but they didn't want to count them when it came to paying federal taxes. The North, which was slowly moving away from slavery, naturally objected. The result was the infamous 3/5 compromise. Every 5 enslaved people would be counted as 3 people for representation and taxation. This compromise temporarily united the country, but enshrined slavery in the Constitution and gave the South disproportionate political power for decades. To prevent the new national government from becoming a tyrannical monarchy, the very thing they had fought a war to escape, the framers created a system called the separation of powers. They didn't just put all the government's power into one bucket. Instead, they created 3 distinct branches. The legislative branch, or Congress, makes the laws. The executive branch, led by the president, carries out those laws. And the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, interprets them. It's a bit like having 3 different teams, each with a very specific job, all working under one roof. Simply separating the powers wasn't enough. The framers also needed to make sure one branch couldn't take over. That's where checks and balances come in. Each branch has the power to limit or check the actions of the others. For example, Congress passes a law, but the president can veto it. If Congress really wants the law, they can override that veto with a 2/3 majority. The goal is a healthy tension, a system of competing interests that prevents anyone from grabbing absolute power, keeping the balance fair. As soon as the Constitution was finished, a massive national debate began over whether the states should approve it or ratify it. 2 major groups emerged: the Federalists, who supported the Constitution because they believed a strong national government was necessary for stability, and the Anti-Federalists, who feared a powerful central government would crush the rights of the states and the people. Think of it as a huge political showdown, like a modern-day election campaign, only over the very structure of the nation. To win over the people of New York, a crucial state for ratification, Federalists Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay wrote a brilliant series of essays known as the Federalist Papers. These weren't just random pamphlets. They were carefully argued pieces that explained exactly how the new Constitution would work and why it would protect liberty rather than threaten it. If you want to know what the framers truly intended for the government, these papers are the ultimate instruction manual. The Anti-Federalists had one main non-negotiable demand before they would agree to the Constitution: a guarantee of individual freedoms. They wanted a written list of rights the government could never take away. This led to the creation of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. These are the rights you hear about all the time: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to a fair trial, and so on. They are the bedrock of American liberty and were the key to getting the Constitution ratified. Once the Constitution was ratified, there was only one person the entire nation trusted to lead it: George Washington. His presidency was critical because everything he did set a precedent, meaning an example for future presidents to follow. He created the cabinet to advise him, established a system for the federal courts, and generally demonstrated how the executive branch was supposed to operate. He was the nation's compass, guiding it through its very first steps. The new nation was drowning in debt from the Revolutionary War, and it needed a plan to become financially stable. The first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, came up with a bold, controversial plan. He proposed that the federal government take over all the state debts, called assumption, and create a national bank. This was huge. The goal was to establish strong national credit, making other countries and American merchants confident in the U.S. government. Hamilton's financial plan was so divisive that it directly led to the rise of the nation's first political parties. Hamilton's supporters, the Federalists, believed in a strong central government and favored business and industry. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison led the Democratic Republicans, who believed in limiting federal power, supporting farmers, and protecting states' rights. Suddenly, the entire nation was split into two camps, marking the beginning of the partisan politics we know today. After 2 terms, George Washington decided to step down, a revolutionary act in itself, as people expected him to stay for life. In his farewell address, he left the nation with 2 key pieces of advice. First, he warned against getting entangled in permanent foreign alliances, essentially urging the country to focus on itself. Second, he warned that the spirit of party, extreme political divisions, could tear the nation apart. It's a surprisingly relevant warning, even today. John Adams, Washington's vice president and a Federalist, became the second president. His time in office was dominated by foreign policy, specifically a naval conflict with France called the Quasi-War. This tense period led to one of the biggest controversies of the early republic. Adams and the Federalist-controlled Congress felt threatened by internal dissent and passed a series of acts to silence their critics. The Alien and Sedition Acts were passed in 1798 and were highly controversial. The Alien Acts targeted immigrants, making it harder for them to become citizens and easier to deport them. But the Sedition Act was the most shocking. It made it a crime to speak, write, or publish any false or malicious criticism of the government. This was a clear attack on the First Amendment right to freedom of speech and the press, and it inflamed the opposition. The Democratic Republicans were furious about the Alien and Sedition Acts. In response, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison secretly wrote the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. These documents argue that the federal government was created by a compact or agreement among the states. Therefore, if the federal government passed an unconstitutional law, the states had the right to declare it null and void, to nullify it. This idea of nullification would become a dangerous issue down the road, setting the stage for future conflict. The election of 1800 was a tense, bitter contest between the Federalist John Adams and the Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson. It was a political earthquake. The result was a victory for Jefferson and a peaceful transfer of power from one political party to a completely different, opposing one. Jefferson called this the Revolution of 1800 because it proved that the American experiment could survive fundamental political change without descending into chaos or violence. The Constitution had held up. The Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, delivered one of its most important decisions in the 1803 case of Marbury v. Madison. This ruling established the crucial concept of judicial review. Essentially, it gave the Supreme Court the final say on whether a law passed by Congress or an action by the President is actually allowed under the Constitution. This one ruling turned the judicial branch into a true co-equal partner in the system of checks and balances. One of Thomas Jefferson's greatest successes was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. For a mere $15 million, he bought a massive territory from France, instantly doubling the size of the United States. Jefferson, who believed in a strict interpretation of the Constitution, worried that he didn't have the explicit power to make such a deal. But the strategic and economic necessity was too great to ignore. This purchase set the stage for decades of westward expansion and solidified America's future as a continental power. The early Republic period was a time of invention, debate, and growth. By the time we enter the 1800s, the Founding Fathers had successfully transitioned the United States from a collection of squabbling states to a unified, constitutional republic. They established a working government with 3 distinct branches, secured individual rights with the Bill of Rights, and peacefully navigated the country's first major political disagreements. This era didn't just create a country, it created the enduring blueprint for American democracy.